Good afternoon, everyone. A beautiful and hot Monday morning here in St. Louis, Monday, June 24th at 3:30 p.m. here in the Kennedy Room. Madam Clerk, the Transportation and Commerce Committee meeting will now come to order. Please call the roll.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Narayan. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderman Browning.
Present.
Chair Cone.
Present.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Narayan. We have 3 present. We have a quorum.
Madam Clerk, Alderwoman Spencer just messaged me saying that she's having difficulty getting in. If you could check the waiting room to make sure that she's permitted.
Sure.
And Alderman Narayan also said that he'd be joining virtually as well. Since we have a quorum, we'll go ahead and move forward with the next item on our agenda, which is the approval of the meeting minutes from Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. I'll entertain a motion on the meeting minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes of Tuesday, June 11th, 2024.
Second.
It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 1st Ward, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th Ward, that we approve our meeting minutes from Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Narayan. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Chair Cone.
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Narayan. We have 3 aye votes.
With that motion, you sustain the, with that vote, you sustain the approval of our meeting minutes from Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. We have a couple items on the agenda for today. I do want to acknowledge that we had some nominees put forth by the mayor on Friday for the Conventions and Visitors Commission. Those are not on the agenda for today, but I have told the sponsor of that and also Alderwoman Spencer that we would look for another hearing date later this week to take those up. And if not able to make that happen, then for our normally scheduled time next Tuesday. So just want to make sure that the public is aware that we will be hearing those at our next available hearing date. Board bills for review, we've got 3 on the agenda for today. All 3 are relating to Bi-State and Metro Transit. And we do have some of our guests from Metro today to speak on these 3 bills. Would you all prefer to do them individually or collectively in terms of the presentation?
Traditionally, we do them collectively since they all lead to the bottom line of the, it just is, happens to be the nature of the legislation and how the taxation works, that they get lumped into one single number. We're asking for the appropriation today.
Great. We'll go ahead then and allow you all to go through our presentation related to the transportation sales tax and the bills before us.
Very good. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the hearing today on these very important board bills and moving transit forward in St. Louis, Missouri. My name is Talby Roach. I'm the president and CEO of Bi-State Development. And among many of our enterprises is, of course, Metro Transit. And I have the Chief Operating Officer, Chuck Stewart, here, who runs Metro Transit, and my Chief Financial Officer, who will be doing the majority of the presentation today, Tammy Fulbright. So if we can go to the next slide, please. One of the most important things in dealing with public policy and, of course, in any kind of venture where we're leading to providing public services, having a continuity of service. And one of the reasons why this is my most favorite slide is that blue box is actually when the current administration, in other words, when I became the president and CEO of Bi-State Development, and the green line represents our growth over the past 6 fiscal years. And of course, keeping that nice level line is about continuity of service and being consistent that your operating is consistent with where the taxes are heading. Now you'll see we have a bit of an increase this year, and That is based, I want to remind everyone that nearly 62% of our operating budget is really labor-based. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the operators and the frontline employees, the mechanics. That really equates for most of the investments that we're asking you to make today. In fact, one of the good pieces of news is that that little bit of bump that we're asking for this year, that 4.4%, is really mostly contained in the first year of a new 3-year labor contract with we have 2 labor unions, ATU and the IBEW. Chuck Stewart has successfully negotiated those, and we're very proud that we moved those labor rates up. We have an extraordinary bonus program that works both for new employees and for existing employees, having to do with long-term savings. That is in this budget, and actually it's a little bit front-loaded. So we are seeing that hit this fiscal year. Tammy can talk about it, but of course the labor negotiations that Chuck went through, he's much more schooled in that. But the point is, we are investing in our people. The city, as long as St. Clair County and St. Louis County challenged us when we had to reduce service in this past year. It was for one reason and one reason only, and that was labor. So we needed to make these investments. We started an extraordinary $5,000 bonus program. And for instance, in January of this year, we were able to return most of that service in frequency back to the lines. So as we continue to grow and look and think of how we can tune this system so it suits our city, we need to have those fundamental employees. And so your support of these bills is critical to fulfilling that labor contract. So I want to be brief and to the point, and I have a specialist in that. That's my CFO, Tammy Fulbright. Tammy, can you step these folks through the rest of the presentation?
Yes, thank you. The one thing I did want to say about the slide too is that we are very focused on fiscal responsibility. So as we showed this 1.9% over the last 6 years, as Talby mentioned, it has not been that high over this 6 years. So we are committed in 26 to bring that number back down. Next slide, please.
Could you introduce yourself to the public?
Sorry. Yes, I'm Tammy Fulbright, the Chief Financial Officer for Bi-State Development. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this next slide really is a comparison of our budget for 2024 compared to our budget that we're presenting today for 2025. The one thing that I want to start off talking a little bit about before I get into the revenue and the operating expenses is the COVID relief money. I think it's important to note as I go through here. So we actually pulled all of our 23 COVID relief money in, and then in 24 we have obligated those funds. So when we are looking at the 25 budget, there's no COVID relief funding within this budget. So you will see some differences on our line items here. So starting out with revenue, the first line item, passenger revenue, you can see that we have a slight change there. It's down about 200,000. We want to be realistic, conservative in our numbers, and so that is reflective of us not having those COVID relief dollars in there. The next line item, grants, sales tax, and contractual revenue, that's our big line item. That's where we get in some federal vehicle maintenance money, about $16 million. It's also made up of the sales tax collection, so the city and the county sales tax, as well as St. Clair County's contractual revenue. So you can see that change there of about $8.3 million. Some of that is asking for additional funding for both sales tax and contractual revenue to those taxes related to labor. The next line item, investment income, you'll see that's up about $9.3 million. So we've had the advantage of being able to take advantage of the Fed rate, and that is helping us and also helping with passenger revenue. The other miscellaneous non-operational revenue line item. So this is where our pass-through grant money goes in. So really it's an out between revenue and expenses. And so that gets us to our final dollar amount of total revenues, $357 million. Going into operating expenses, as Mr. Roach mentioned, wages and benefits big part of our budget. You can see there that we are increasing by about 7.7 million. We were able to offset some of those increases by some savings in both medical and work that also fall within that. Going into the next item, services, that's primarily focused on consulting services or police contract services. That's a big line item for us too, only up 1.5 million from 2024. Parts and supplies, you can see that line item is up to 11.3 million, an increase of about, I'm sorry, I might have jumped over, fuel. I apologize. So the next line item is fuel, and that is 11.3 million compared to 9.7 million last year, an increase of 1.5 million. So we have a fuel hedge program, and that program basically helps us to balance our not see huge increases in fuel year over year in our budget. This year in 25, we are starting to realize some of that increase, though, in fuel. So that's why you're seeing the increase of 1.5 million. The next line in parts and supplies, this is important to us too. As you can see, we have minimal increase of about 300,000 there. We've managed our parts and our supplies very well with our maintenance team. The next line in casualty and liability, you can see compared to last year at 8.3 million, we're at 11.3, so up 3 million. And that's primarily due to premiums related to the flood that we experienced a couple years ago. So we're starting to realize the budget also. Moving on to the next line item, utilities, you'll see that we're up slightly by about 400,000 there. Other operating expenses down about 300, so they're kind of offsetting each other. And then our management and administrative fees are down about 200,000, getting us to a total operating cost of 328 or 329 million. So if you move to the next slide. So this is our ask of the appropriation. So of course it's inclusive of our transportation trust fund, half-cent sales tax, the Prop 1 quarter-cent, and Prop 2 quarter-cent. So in 24 we requested 44.6 million, and in 25 we are up about 2 million at 46.6 million. So about a 4% increase.
Tammy, I'm sorry, could you go back to the last slide? And,
Yes.
You really didn't get into the interest expense or other miscellaneous non-operating expenses.
Yes, I can go into those. So those two line items are kind of below the line, but they are important. So the interest expense, that primarily is really in focus with St. Louis County and St. Louis City on our bonds. So you can see that we have a decrease there, and I'm sorry to get back to that sheet, of about 3.3 million. And that's primarily due to bond refundings and savings that we've had there. And then the other miscellaneous non-operating expenses, that's where the sheltered workshop funding goes, other expenses that are kind of outside of our operating expense. So that increase there of that 1.8 million is primarily due to the sheltered workshop. And then that gets us to net income of 3.8 million. As you can see, our depreciation, that's 64.6 million. That's really, so when we look at our depreciation, most of that is funded. Most of our capital is funded through FTA. So the focus isn't so much on that line item as far as depreciation, because they help fund that. The net transfers, that 3.9 million, is really related to our self-insurance program. And so that's really offsetting that income. See there.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
We can continue through, and then we'll go through committee questions.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Chairman, I looked at a couple of proactive items that you mentioned to me. First of all, there's always some discussion about bus stop amenities and working on bus stops in some particular areas. So I will say that we recently partnered with the city through BPS to get a transportation alternatives program, and we were awarded $2.5 million to work on amenities, in particular on Grand, Delmar, and MLK. That's really with ADA access. I apologize.
Yeah, can we just talk about what those mean for the folks that weren't part of the conversation?
Yes.
Great.
So those would be for literally access to bus stops. Alderman asked that I detail some of the access to bus stops, in particular in the very important bus stops. The number Grand, number 70, is our number one bus line in the whole system, quite frankly. So it's very, very important, and having different options at the bus stops are nice and clean and amenable are very important. And Alderman Cohn asked me proactively when scheduling this hearing to be ready to address some of that. And of course, I can take any questions. But I asked staff to look very quickly at, did we have some funding available? Because a lot of times it's not just the bus stop. Under ADA law, we have to be sure that the sidewalks and curb cuts and so on also can access that. So the good news is that we were able to, through a partnership with BPS, have some funds available to concentrate on those lines, and we are doing so. And this can also include bus stop enhancements, and we have been working very hard at coming up with different alternatives, not just the traditional shelters, although those are good, but we're trying to figure out how, if it's not a shelter, maybe it's just, and I actually have pictures of one that we just recently contracted to get, which includes literally on the bus stop post, just a simple seat, so that when there's a single passenger waiting for a bus, they can be there, and it doesn't have the load of a large shelter, but it helps the customers. And quite frankly, when you're waiting for a bus, being able to sit for 10 minutes is a nice amenity. So we're looking at increasing some of these individual amenities along the stops. The other issue that always comes up is we're always talking about managing trash and trash load within really all parts of the region. And so what we have done traditionally with the city of St. Louis is we have a cooperative arrangement with our funding appropriation where the city takes $150,000 of that appropriation and reappropriates it to the refuse department, who then is responsible for part of the trash pickups along our major routes. But even with that, my team is under right-of-way maintenance is still, their responsibility is 25 trash cans along individual routes. And look, that's just part of being good neighbors and figuring things out. So we definitely try to do that. But I am concerned about mission creep. I do not want to become the refuse department either. So we're trying to be sure that we're being responsive to the alderman and woman's request, and be responsive to what is the normal load associated with our citizens as they're getting on and off of our system. So embedded within this legislation, and we'd be happy for it to be supported, and we've seen this over the past 8 fiscal years, is a cooperative arrangement to offset some of those costs associated with trash. But even with that, it's not unusual for our team. Chuck and I were talking about it on the way over. If there's an individual request on a stop, look, we have to be flexible. There's issues that are associated with security at individual stops. Sometimes at an alderman and woman's request, we might look at an individual stop if there are security concerns or if there's too much trash. We try to be as flexible as possible, albeit with the tension between what is the customer's need. So we try to be very responsive. I know several of you have talked to my staff. We will continue to be available for any of those calls, even if it's 1 stop, 2 stop, or 10 stops. But the idea being that we need to move where we're serving the entire community and be sure that we're representing that tension. So I did want to be proactive about a couple of those requests from Alderman Cohn while we were talking, but I certainly have more. And Alderman, if it's acceptable to you, we'll conclude our presentation and take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for the information. We'll go ahead and I'll start with questions from the members of the committee. that are present. Alderwoman Spencer.
Chair, and thank you, Mr. Roach, for being here today. I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around the full cost. One of the things, if you go back a couple of slides, I noticed, I guess it was just back. Well, I guess first of all, the request of 46.6 million here in the fiscal year 2025. What is the total amount of the quarter cent sales tax available? From this.
Yes, so that is the total amount of the tax that we're asking for on this sheet. This is our projected expectation of the sales tax. What we have seen in the last couple of years, though, is that sales tax has done really well in the city, which has been helpful. It has allowed us to apply more money towards capital, which we have needed and haven't always asked for in the past. So we're at a point where that's really important to us as an agency, too. COVID kind of slowed that down a little bit. So that's going to help us get back to where we need to be on the capital side, too.
But the 46.6 million is what is available as far as the sales tax is concerned, the projected available funds. I know the sales tax is creeping up, but the request, is it in exactly what we're projected to bring in, or can you?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, that is what we are projecting. So we are projecting that all three sales taxes in total will be at 46.6 million.
Okay, that's what you are. Is it in line with what the budget director is also projecting for those sales tax?
Yes, we did talk to them, and we also kind of looked at our experience. I talked to them, and we looked at our experience of what we've been seeing in the last couple of years to come up with that projection.
Okay. If you go back to one slide, Tammy.
Yes. Can we go back one? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. One thing that's noteworthy here, we have almost everything, most things here are increasing. The cost, the operating expense, et cetera, except that the passenger revenue is decreasing. So we're seeing a decrease in ridership. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I can speak a little bit. I may Chuck to speak to that a little bit more. But as far as what we're projecting on the budget side, this is where we feel like this is what we're actually seeing in passenger revenue. And so that's where we budgeted this year. We don't have any more COVID relief money. So in some cases in the previous years, we were plugging in some of those funds in to help the passenger revenue side. But this is a more realistic number of where we think we're going to come in for 2025. And as far as the ridership, I don't know if you want to speak on that.
Good afternoon, Chuck Stewart, Chief Operating Officer, Metro Transit. Ridership is not down. Okay, ridership is pretty consistent over the last 3 years. After the pandemic, it was down significantly, but we're showing about a 6% increase every year since then. And I think we were going to be about at that same spot this year as well. So the revenue collection is not a function necessarily of ridership decreasing.
I'm sorry, that's a little bit confusing for me. So if the ridership is going up, why is the projected revenue from passenger revenue going down?
And some of that could be due to discounts and different programs that we offer. So we aren't, it's our average fare that we're actually getting when we look at all of our fares, applying those discounts and really trying to promote that ridership.
Okay, thanks, Tammy.
And the one other thing I would like to mention is that even though it is slightly down, we do think that we can help recover some of that balancing as investment.
Okay, that was helpful. If you could, I think it would be helpful. I don't know all the discounted programs. I know we had talked about one just the last time you were here with regards to kind of getting folks to the courts and things like that. If there's any way you could kind of share that with the committee, I'd be grateful.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. I will.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and thank you all for being here and for that presentation. Going to the budget slide, which you still have, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about the other operating expenses and all the different things that are in there?
Yes, so really primarily, a lot of that, not all, but some of that is focused on training. So in '24, after COVID, we pushed that number up because in the prior 2 years, it had gone down some. So again, in '25, we're being a little bit more realistic, reeling that in. But that's one of the big areas. There is some travel in there as well as training, with the training program. But it's really focused on our training area.
Okay, so for things like, to Chairman Cohn's questions, trash pickup or anything like that, is that in services? Or where would you see something like that? Or would that be in total wages and benefits, or is it not because services, I thought you said was mostly security?
It is. So it would be captured within services. It could also be I can't remember off the top of my head if it's actually in other operating expenses because of the type of expense it is and that we're paying for trash outside of like our facilities and that sort of thing. So it may actually be in that line item, but that's where it would be, either within services or other operating expenses.
Okay.
And I can provide more detail as to what these line items represent.
Yeah, I'm always interested. Just
Okay.
seeing what's being spent on. Obviously, they're big numbers, but you have big categories of things you spend money on. So I appreciate the simplicity of a page. The other, going up to the revenue piece, the other miscellaneous non-operational revenue, I believe you said mostly that's pass-through grants. But you mentioned, or Mr. Roach did, working with BPS for $2.5 million, which was from the capital committee, correct? That was a capital committee.
Yes,
Yeah, I remember.
that would be considered capital. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be where would that money show up in this budget?
What are we talking about?
The $2.5 million capital investment from the capital committee.
Yes, that would show up in that line item then.
In the other,
Yes, and so this gets a little bit confusing in the sense that, so this is really focused on operational. So yeah, so there's some non-capitalized project money in here that we get grants for that goes through. That's why I'm saying it's really a pass-through. So it comes in as an expense, and then we use the revenue. The other side of it is our actual capital budget. So when I was saying that we increased that side of it in the request from you, that's really our capital budget. So for the big projects that we have that we do, on the facilities and different areas within the organization.
okay, so that we might not see on this page at
That's
all.
exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit more about how that piece gets funded? If it's mostly grants or if it's
Yes.
not through this tax?
Right. So what happens with our capital programs is that 80%, it's usually an 80-20 split. So our capital projects then are funded by mostly 80% by the FTA. The other 20% is funded by our funding partners, so through St. Clair County or the city and the county through their sales tax. So that's where I was kind of concentrating earlier when I was speaking to the increasing of capital as part of the appropriation requests that we're asking for.
Thank you. That helps me a lot. I appreciate that explanation.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm excited about the bus stop amenities upcoming and think that it's great that that's what we moved some money from the capital committee to cover. That's such an important infrastructure expense. You mentioned a few streets, Grand, Del Mar, and MLK. So obviously this week we're going to have some open houses for the Grand arterial improvements, the American Rescue Plan Act funds. Have you all been working hand in hand with those designs as they come through to make sure it's all happening simultaneously, or is that a separate conversation for Grand?
I need to get back to you because I don't know, quite frankly. So I'm going to need to ask staff about that. But frequently planning is involved in those conversations, especially if they're impacting specific bus lines. So I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, it's been, we have the American Rescue Plan Act funds going to pay for arterial repaving and traffic calming on many arterials in the city. And really excited about that. But when you think about Grand, as you know, I don't have to tell you this, it's so important for that bus route to run well and be considered. So the first meeting is tomorrow night, correct? And then tomorrow and Thursday are the
Thursday,
public open houses.
Tomorrow and Thursday, yes.
Right.
One on Thursdays at St. Mary's High School, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. if you're not aware.
And then tomorrow's Herbert Hoover Boys and Girls Club, also in Grand, 4 to 7. Yeah. I appreciate that. Do you know if it'll cover all the bus stops for upgrades?
I don't know. I don't know if it's going to cover every single one of them, but I will tell you that accessing these grants, we use the city's established policy of traffic calming and enhancements to pedestrian and bicycle facilities along these boulevards in order to garner those very funds that we're talking about. Those are prominently featured within the new paradigm that FTA is funding. In fact, and it's backed up by our fundamental ridership numbers, I like to say that we are in a partnership of, just like this committee, this is transportation. It's not just transit.
Sure.
Transit involves, for instance, pedestrian, bicycle, and so on. So I can't thank you enough because that helps us actually compete for the very funding, that important 80% that we're looking at.
Right.
Those are really absolutely key to priming the pump, so to speak.
Sure, I can imagine that that's true. I know with the other infrastructure funds that the city is trying to compete for outside of FTA, thinking about the safety plans and the networking and all of that, the more planning that the city has done around those, the better, more easily the city can get these grants. So that's interesting that it's the same, that it depends on that same sort of policy. It makes sense. Okay, let's see. Okay, I think those were my questions. I appreciate your time today.
Alderman Browning?
Thank you. I think my colleagues covered most of the questions I had. I'm encouraged to hear about the improvements to bus stops, and as Alderwoman Schweitzer referenced, I think that the improvements along Grand are especially important. So again, I appreciate you all coming today and sharing this with us, and being responsive as always. So I know that we can always reach out with any questions that we have, and that you're always quick to answer. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Alderman.
I too want to express my gratitude for you all being accessible and always professional in your interactions with this committee and also the public when we've had discussions around important issues. I want to thank you for also, I know we had a conversation very briefly last week where I shared concerns around refuse and ADA accessibility and stops and general shelters in particular, and the safety of those. So I just want to go through those a little bit more. So on the ADA accessibility, obviously Grand is a very important node. It's the busiest node and the busiest line in the entire system. But we also have other routes that may not be as busy but might be adjacent, or a connecting route that also need attention. And it becomes a little frustrating for me sometimes because, and not necessarily a reflection of bi-state or metro, but I know certainly on the city side, our main arterial roads are the ones that always get attention. And then we have routes like, one that I'm also very familiar with is the Local 73, which, essentially runs Broadway, Virginia, and kind of loops around until it gets to Civic Center downtown. But a lot of those stops are not necessarily, being touched or refreshed all the time. But it's also a busier route in the city as well. And if I'm not mistaken, runs from South County Center, the mall down in South County, to Civic Center, right at the footsteps here of City Hall. I know that's true. I've done that route before, but I just want to make sure that we're also setting aside funds for other routes and not just, those along major arterials as well?
So a very key component of, as we design this system, also has an equity component. So we do, even though you cannot do everything cost benefit, that's simply not how transit works. Because an individual who may be on, let me just use the number 12 city limits, that's a line that snakes through many neighborhoods, but it is a key link to some citizens of real need. So you could argue that the value to that individual citizen as far as access is concerned, you mentioned the ADA community, is even more important. So we do need to be sure that we're trying to balance that system. And one of the federal laws that we respond to, including the 1974 ADA law, is Title VI, just to be sure that we are addressing every neighborhood with an equity lens, so that we're being sure that we're in and serving the community. One thing, and I was looking at data, if you don't mind me sharing, Alderman Cone, we were looking at data, kind of trying to look at Alderwoman Spencer's really good question about passenger revenue. It's a bit of a mystery. We're not trying to be obtuse. It's hard to answer that question. But in our fundamental, we just did a recent survey of customers. This is a rigorous survey, 572 respondees. And they did, typical, how much do you make per year? 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, et cetera, all the way up to 100,000. 71% of our customers reported making under $60,000. As a matter of fact, 55% under 40. And so what we're seeing in the current post-COVID environment is that we are very much serving the community right now. They're uniquely situated to be sure that we're serving these important customers in their upward mobility. And of those respondees, when they were asked where were they going, 81% of them were going to work or school. So this is literally the workforce of the St. Louis region who is on our current. And because that income coefficient is a little bit more and skewed to that, that may be part of the reason why our passenger revenue is down, because those very folks would be eligible for more pass programs, as they should be, okay? So we think that's part of the answer, but it's a really important and interesting data point that I like to share. I just recently got it, and I'm happy to share the committee of who our ridership is, because after all, that's why we're here. We're here for the citizens.
That's great. I would be remiss if I didn't ask the question, how much would it take to improve frequency of buses on our busier routes in particular? So, are we doing those types of assessments right now to determine, because, we constantly hear in the media and, feel it in the community about, cutting back on routes or rearranging routes, eliminating routes, and reducing frequency of pickup times, which also affects ridership, right? So if it, takes you 20 minutes by Uber or 45 minutes, with 3 transfers via Bi-State, you're more than likely going to end up taking the Uber out of either reliability, efficiency, and not necessarily cost. But that's something that we should be also evaluating and trying to improve upon. And I'm just curious, are there any costs, evaluations going on, underway now to see what we can do to improve that?
Alderman, I don't think it's a cost issue. As a matter of fact, we had a service change the 17th of June. At that time, we added back frequency to 15 routes. We added back evenings on 4 routes in North County. It's the second major change we've done since last year. We did one, and it's really because of our manpower issue, our operator issue. We've significantly improved our staffing in terms of operators. We had a service change in January. We never have a service change in January. but we had enough operators at that time to make a change at that time. And I think at that point, we changed frequencies on about 21 routes, I think. So what we're focused on right now is not cutting. We're not cutting, we're adding back. Right now, we can add frequency and we can add reliability. And that's what we're focusing on. And that's pretty much what we'll be doing the rest of this year. As we get more, we can't really expand. We can't really go to the point of adding routes back, but I can do a better job of servicing the routes that I have. And that is certainly what we're trying to do right now.
It would be wonderful if when we have news like that it is shared with the media. I'm not sure if it is, but if it isn't, we certainly need to be sharing that because I think it's important for our neighbors, our constituents to understand that that is also an emphasis as well, and also what drives those decisions. Alderwoman, I do see your hand up. I'm going to get through my line of questioning, so as soon as I'm finished, I'll come back to you. So the other thing that we discussed as well was shelters, right? It's always a mixed bag when you bring up shelters. Some people don't want them because they quote unquote attract nuisance. I have always been of the mindset that we need to make transit more accessible, make it easier and comfortable for people to, enjoy these amenities that we offer as a region. Yes, are there challenges at shelters? I probably have one or two in my ward that are giving the fine folks at Metro a headache on a regular basis. But I just want to revisit that with you, Mr. Roach, because I think during our conversation, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that there are funds for shelters and that you just need for lack of a better term, cover to be able to put those shelters in place. Probably partly because of the pushback that comes from members of the community and sometimes even older people with respect to placement of those shelters. And so I don't know if that's necessarily reflected in this budget or the operating budget that you have before us, but I am curious, what budget is there? How many shelters, would we be able to put up if we wanted to put them up? And is there a way that we might even be able to use kind of non-standard shelters if people have, or communities have ideas in terms of what shelters they would like to see? I, for one, am one of those folks that likes to Google bus shelters across the globe when I'm laying in bed at night. And so if I come across a cool idea, is that something that I can pitch to my neighbors and, we work through that? I'm just curious, what your thoughts are on that, what resources are available.
Very helpful. A lot of times, the challenge of shelters really has to do with right-of-way and putting one in. So for instance, we do have, luckily, federal funds that we can apply for and do apply for. And I believe we have some residual funds for bus shelters in the city of St. Louis. I don't know exactly what that is, where we could commit to doing that. But a lot of times what I need, for instance, the political support and cover associated with, look, we're trying to do for the greater good. And sometimes the greater good is 90% of people, but 10% are going to be, you guys are very familiar with those difficult conundrums. So what we need from our policymakers is that continued support. But, and that's one of the reasons why I brought this one very simple shelter alternative in that just has a seat, but looking at more creative ways and what is that support on the streetscape is really, and I'm a believer too, I'm a transit nerd all the way, and I think how we look at our streetscapes and our sidewalks and how they interact with our community is the way to the greater community that we can be, one that's inviting. And so, yeah, my planning team would love, and I think a lot of you have some I know I've seen some of the emails where you've had good interaction with the team and they want to get out there and put those amenities out. They don't all have to be the fancy traditional wall glass shelters. They can be smaller options. One of the things that is tough, however, is that sometimes we'll put in a shelter and then after 6 months, things will waver a little bit. And sometimes those become some hard decisions and you guys have to talk to those local, I don't know, restaurant owner or someone who doesn't like the shelter. So we just need some help in those community voices and community decisions with what are those impacts. And, you know, that's why I have staff. They're there to work and they like working in those dense situations where we have a lot of good riders and opportunities at the street in streetscape. So I do know that we have opportunities as far as some federal funding for that. And that's one of the reasons why we have modest capital funding put aside to do the 20% of that. We wouldn't need to ask for, we're not asking for any new money. As a matter of fact, as you guys saw, we're getting new light rail vehicles. I'm not asking for a local match on that, right? Well, why is that? Because we used our COVID money. So that means all of us do well. We end up having better service. So that's part of our job. We're committed to that job. I think it's a very reasonable request. As a matter of fact, it helps us integrate transit better into our neighborhood.
Wonderful. We talked about ADA accessibility. We talked about enhancing routes, frequency times. We talked about shelters, and I feel like there was one, trash. The other important topic of trash. And I know that you want to avoid mission creep, but respectfully, and I think I mentioned this in our conversation, it's also policies that are in place that are implemented by State Metro that have that trash ending up in our communities, right? And so the city isn't the one that says, no, you can't bring your drink or your food onto the bus. That's Metro by State that has that policy in place. And so where are people going to put that trash if there's not a trash can available to them, right? It's going to end up on the street, on the sidewalk, and in the yards of the neighbors who live around that bus stop. And so I was here. I'm probably one of the few alderpersons that was around when we had this conversation, probably about a decade ago now, or close to it. And it's something where I've started to notice, and I don't know if it's the, MOU needs to be revisited or what have you in terms of, the number of cans that are out there, the, frequency of trash pickup as well. And so I will probably be reaching out to you all. I mean, we can have that conversation now. I don't know if you're prepared to have that conversation in terms of how much that would be. I think if I recall correctly, when we went through this the first time around, there was like a $500,000 set aside for the cans essentially. And then it's $150,000 over to the refuse department for the pickup of them. I'm just kind of picking my brain on those.
You're in the ballpark. That's right.
But I think it would probably be important because it is still something that happens, particularly on those smaller routes where neighbors, and those smaller routes are generally running through our neighborhoods, right? They're not on, a Broadway, Grand, Natural Bridge, et cetera. They're on streets like Virginia and Michigan and others, right? So not sure if you're ready to talk about that right now.
So what I can commit to maybe why don't I do a little supplemental report on where we are today? So just by memory, you're largely correct. We have the set aside within the existing budget that moves over to the refuse department. We take care of at least 25 existing, and then we have a few that just over the years we've picked up. Okay, look, we have to be good neighbors. If we get a mad call from Alderwoman Schweitzer, I'm sorry to, look, I'm going to respond. You guys know I'm going to answer our phone call, and we try to work with our communities. We like to think we're part of the community. I was just talking to Chuck. He has to process some of those invoices, and Tammy has to pay them. So we do have contractors that supplement that. So maybe if it's acceptable, why don't I just do a supplemental, just quick memo on where we think it is right now? And then the committee can take a look at what is this good enough, or what could we do? What could we share? And right now, it's clearly a shared situation. We're doing some, Refuse is doing some others. And if we need to push it a little bit, let's try to be flexible.
That would be great.
Okay, I can do that.
I'm going to go back through members of the committee just in case anyone had questions after that brief discussion. Vice Chair Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a request. I was raising my hand earlier just to see if Mr. Roach would repeat the statistics on income levels for riders. I heard the second part, but not the first part.
I will send this. It's a customer pulse survey, and I will send it to the committee. Super interesting. So the question posed, and there was over 500 respondees, is last year, what was your approximate combined household income before taxes? Okay? And it goes from 0 to 20,000. Well, that's 37.9%. Okay? 20 to 40, 23.92%. And then from 40 to 59 is 13.7 for roughly, and I have 2 years compiled here, both quarter 1 of 24 and quarter 4 of 23. Really compelling information, and I'm happy to share with the committee, and I hope I haven't messed up a number there. But in generalization, nearly 70% of our customers year over year in both of the surveys are under that $60,000 mark. I think that's compelling. And then the other question that I quoted was the question is, what were you using transit today? And in a combination of work and school, it is over 81% in both years. So it's telling us who our customers are and what they are doing. And I thought both of them to be really compelling and very important to policymakers like yourself. And I'm happy to share that information with the committee. You could take a look at the whole report. It's really very, very interesting stuff.
Just a follow-up on that. It would be really helpful, I think, to understand, how many are going to school versus going to work, but also just how those numbers compare nationally. I'm not familiar with those national statistics, and so it'd be helpful if we have those handy.
Yeah, so I'll have to look through. There is some good. I'll have to look at the national numbers and try to match this. This happens to be our own customer pulse survey. But I'll give you this, and I'll ask staff to take a look at. There's some really good National Transit NTD, what's called NTD, National Transit Database information that gives some very good information, very similar to these demographics that, and I'll ask the team to kind of compile some of that because it gives us a good idea. We've definitely seen a change in what our fundamental customers are. And so targeting and being very intentional about who they are, where they live, and where they are going is really, really important. And we need to design our system so that it's responsive to those individuals.
What are the changes that you've seen, Mr. What you said you've definitely seen a change in your ridership and the demographics. Can you?
So there's a lot of, there's a much stronger reverse commute, quite frankly. We've seen much more economic diffusion. So less downtown centric, not that downtown isn't very important, still very much is, but because of a lot more work from home environments and a more diffusion, especially in cities like ours, a tier 2 Midwestern city like like an Indianapolis, a Green Bay, Pittsburgh, where you've seen a lot more ridership, especially what we see is folks who clearly live in the city but are going to jobs in the inner ring suburbs, okay? And where we're, for instance, on the Blue Line, we're seeing a lot more early morning reverse commute. So I happen to see this because my home stop is Skinker. A lot of times, I come by my gray hair, honestly, I take that at 6:30 in the morning and I look at the train going out. So at Skinker, that's right on the city border. So where are those folks going at 6:30 in the morning? Well, quite frankly, they're going to work. And I would say a good 90 to 95% of them clearly live in the city. So we're seeing some general trends like that. This is kind of anecdotal. Let me point that out. But some of it seems to be also shown in some of these customer surveys as well. And we've seen it in some of the bus lines as well. A lot of strength in, for instance, North City and the North City lines, strength in a Grand Line, some need for movement from north to south, and some of the, albeit sometimes anecdotal, and we like the trends to be seen over more than 4 years, but certainly the last 4 years have kind of shown us that.
Great, that's helpful. Yeah, and if you, I would appreciate seeing those trends. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm just going to tap in. Mr. Chair, looks like he's on the phone, so I'm going to, that was really interesting about the more diffuse ridership. Yeah, I've noticed sometimes that, when I take the bus, I can get from my house to downtown and then from downtown to somewhere else, but I can't always get from wherever I go back to my house because of, I guess, where the different nodes are. Do you think that lends itself to increased routes that don't really ever come downtown, or is that the future planning? Back to future planning, as you see those sort of trends?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. So we have the major routes that carry close to 80% of our ridership. If you took our top 10 routes along with Metrolink, it accounts for a huge percentage of our ridership. The question is, how do we then serve some of these individual community routes? And we've seen some more, and we've done some tests with on-demand type services, partnering with Uber and Lyft to try to supplement some of those things. And we have some pilots in place where we're doing that. So I do think that the future does have some elements of that new modern mobility. And the truth is our citizens are more mobile in walking and bicycling and some of those others. So in our city design, incorporating some of those more friendly, pedestrian-friendly amenities are really, really key. Also with sometimes partnerships with an Uber and Lyft, we're just on a pilot basis. I will say I am concerned about those sometimes because I am concerned about eliminating a route, putting Uber or Lyft back on a contract basis, and then them pulling out of the contract, and then what do we have to, we still have a value citizen to, so you have to be careful. We're about public service, not profit.
Right.
So we have to be careful about what that dynamic leads. But we definitely need to look at, and also what is our biggest moment of scarcity is unquestionably our labor force. Okay. We certainly, as evidenced through our budget, most of our investments are in our labor force. And I would say of our labor force, we have an average employee among our frontline labor, which is probably an average of 9 years at least, Chuck, which tells you that we have a lot of seasoned operators who really move St. Louis, wonderful folks. And we need to look at where are those investments. But that's our moment of scarcity. We've had trouble and have had service impacts associated with that. So figuring out what that modern workforce is in tension with what that design should be. That's what, there's the need. Yes, we can say, hey, we have this need, but can we fulfill it reliably?
Right.
And we've definitely had that tension point over the last 2 years, realistically.
Right. And it's sort of a chicken or the egg question in so many ways. It's like to
Hard.
build ridership, you need more routes. To have more routes, you need to build ridership. It kind of goes around the circle, circle. And I'm interested in the transit-oriented development, just concept and what St. Louis can do to improve in that way, and how the city prioritizing investment and development along transit routes and along areas where these are available can also kind of bring that ridership. And I always mention to you that great video you all did, which shows where Bi-State has done investment and then what other investments have come around it. And we know that to be a modern city and a place people want to move to, they need to have access to walking, biking, transit. That's what people want to see. So we just know we have to work together to build this all out. So I appreciate your answers.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Alderman Browning.
Thank you. And I appreciate that additional information on transit-oriented development as well. So I think we'll be discussing that in tomorrow's HUD's meeting as well. So I'm excited about that. Just one more question, and that was, I haven't really heard too much said about Coloride and any progress made there. Can you speak a little to that?
I can. So we had the hearing here just, I guess that was 3 weeks ago, and we continue to maybe even exhaust you with our monthly updates. We're continuing that. The one statistic that I really like to, and honestly, this man to my right deserves credit. 14 months ago, we were providing 5,000 a week Coloride rides. Chuck, I think last week you were up to 6,800?
Wow.
Close to 7. And that has everything to do with that recruiting. And we had to come in here and listen to some hard questions. And one of the things is I respect and understand you guys are here to push us on that. What you should demand of us is that then we show you data that we're being responsive. It doesn't mean that we can do everything. You guys know we have to play the long game, but we've had some nice wins. We're on a road to recovery and doing better. The new leadership that Chuck has put in, I think, has been instrumental in making some differences. We actually, and by the way, I do want to mention to you specifically, Alderman Browning, the Board of Commissioners held an open session for public comment at our last public meeting, which our board chair created a 30-minute period of time at the beginning of our meeting to hear from public comments, and they were from the ADA community. And I'm going to characterize them. They were reasonable. They were about partnership. They had compliments for us. They had critiques as well. We're leaning in and working together, and we're not getting caught in the concrete. We need to be responsive and still run an agency that changes with what are the needs of our constituents, and part of that is informed by the data that we have that we're going to share with you.
Well, thank you. And I know we did ask you about that, and we do ask you about that often, and I appreciate you being, again, responsive every time. You never know who's going to tune into this meeting or that, so I think it's important to keep asking about it. But as you said, it's our job to keep pressing you as well. I also just want to say it is really nice to hear of somebody who heads up a transit-oriented agency that they also ride the train or the bus, making sure that they understand what that daily experience is for the ridership as well. So all good updates. I really appreciate it. And as always, we really appreciate you coming in and updating us and everything.
Very good. Thank you, Alderman.
Okay, I did just have on the board bills themselves for the presentation. So the presentation, we have the request at 46.6 million, but the numbers in the board bills, when you add them up, come to north of that,
Right.
it's 51.3 million.
Yes, so,
So,
I'm sorry.
no,
Yes,
please.
so every year, we put in a 10%, I don't really like the word cushion, but that's kind of what it is, so that if the sales tax comes in more, that we are able to collect that, and that money's been able to be transferred to Bi-State. And as I said earlier when we were talking about capital, when we have those needs, that's how we will fund them. So as in the last year or so, we have seen better sales tax, so it has come in higher than what the budget was, but that is what's helping us to fund some of these capital projects too.
Great. Okay, thank you for the clarification on that. I think what I'm going to do for now is we'll go ahead and take a vote on Board Bill 46, which is the larger of the three amounts.
56.
What did I say?
46.
Oh, 56, my apologies. And then while we're waiting on the additional information on shelters and trash, we'll hold off on the other two until we can get the additional information there in case we need to make any amendments to them to accommodate those. I guess my intent would, or my hope would be that we can try and get some of those numbers this week so that we can have another committee hearing next week to vote on 56 and 57, or I'm sorry, 57 and 58.
Well, sure. I mean, so I would prefer that we complete the legislation, Alderman. But there's never a time where you ask for something where I'm not going to provide it. And so I do like to get the legislation out of the way. But obviously, that's the committee's fiat, and I do not want to, but I respectfully ask to complete all of the board bills. And if you ever found that me or my board was not responsive to any of those issues, I could understand holding it up, but I have a very arduous appropriation process to get through all three funders. And I would respectfully request to complete all the board bills, and I will be happy to work right away on those issues, and I'm happy to get information about them.
I hear that, and I would not expect you to come before us again for a whole, dog and pony show, so to speak, because I know that you're going to have to go to the county council, you're going to have to go to their county and wonderful other entities provide you all funding. My concern is that if I don't want to have to do amendments from the floor, so if there are amendments, that would have to be made, I'd rather do that in committee. It's easier, it's more respective of the time of this legislative body. So I just want to be mindful of that. I'm not trying to hold it up. We'll go ahead and, vote on these, but I do want to have, the answers for the, at least those two issues that we discussed about. And then if we have to make amendments, then we can do that here in committee, and we'll have all three of them voted out. I mean, this first one, the larger one, certainly, we'll have it second read this Friday, and then, as long as the committee, votes in favor of it, which I anticipate they will. And then, likewise, if I can have another committee hearing this week, I would be more than welcome, to do that, depending upon how quickly we can get the information available. But I know you indicated that you're going to have your team, go through and do an assessment of, the trash. And then also, I have to look at this beautiful picture that you gave of a bus shelter idea here. I don't think that will take too much time, but I think my preference right now is just to move forward with 56, and then we'll get to 57, 58. Hopefully there won't be any changes necessary, but just in the event that there is, hold them, because I detest having to make changes on the floor. So respectfully.
Gotcha.
Okay. And with that, I would entertain a motion on Board Bill 56.
I move that we pass Board Bill 56 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 1st that we pass Board Bill 56 out with a due pass recommendation. It's been seconded by the Alderman from the 9th Ward. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Spencer,
Aye.
Alderman Orion, Alderwoman Schweitzer,
Aye.
Alderman Browning,
Aye.
Chair Cone,
Aye.
Alderman Orion. We have 4 aye votes.
With that motion, you sustain the vote to pass Board Bill 56 out of committee with a do pass recommendation. As mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and hold 57 and 58 for a meeting either later this week or early next week. Our standard meeting date is Tuesday, as the woman from the First Ward likes to remind me. So if anything, we'll try to have that meeting next Tuesday morning. Hopefully we can try and get the information before then, though. And then I know my colleague from the 9th Ward also mentioned that we're supposed to be talking about the Green Line TOD tomorrow. There's Board Bill 13, I believe, is the number of the board bill discussing that. Alderman, I hate to tell you, but we're probably going to be pushing that to a meeting date later this week. I've been trying to work with the mayor's office, the chair of HUD's, planning commission, or the planning office, and others to make them aware of that. And so we won't be hearing it tomorrow in HUD's, but the goal is certainly to try and get it done this week. So just a heads up on that front. I know you're anxiously awaiting that committee hearing as well. So anywho, there is no further items on the agenda, so I will entertain a motion.
Were we going to excuse?
Excuse. We are short a member today. The alderman from the 4th Ward was unable to attend. If you could, he did actually notify me that he would not be able to attend today. So Madam Clerk, if you could please excuse him for necessary absence, I would appreciate it.
Noted.
And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Previous roll.
Is there any objection to previous roll? Hearing and seeing none, we stand adjourned.